Okay, welcome guys. So what we're going to do today is we wanted to take the entire coaching structure process and just condense it into one lecture. So the slides that you're going to see today are slides that have been integrated into our first session, second session, all of those slides. Yet what we've done is kind of pulled out those key components of the actual structure and consolidated them into one set of slides, so that way you just have a good feel for the flow of how that coaching structure is going to look from start to finish. Okay, so here's our trusty little 3 parts of health coaching. We've got our partnership and our skills, and so now we're going to dig into the actual structure, what each of those sessions is going to look like from start to finish. So here is our process, and you guys have seen this before. So in that first stage, and this is really kind of session 1, where you're really going to dig into those vision and values. And once we've got a good feel of their vision and values and, you know, what brought them to health coaching, then we're going to start diving into the assessment and determine their readiness for change. And that's going to really develop in session 2. And once we get a good idea of, hey, are they even ready to change? How important is this to them? Do they have the confidence that they, yes, can make this change? That's when we get to dive into the actual goal setting and then starting some of those action steps that are really going to get us to that longer term goal that they would like to accomplish. And then we get into the fun part, the doing. This is when they're doing the action, those actual steps that they're taking to get them where they want to be. And then that's going to roll us over into maintenance. Okay, so let's just talk a little bit about vision. This is basically the picture of their optimal health. And a lot of times, as we talked about last week, guided imagery is a great tool to use with this, to just have them vision, what do I see in that picture of best health? And this can really highlight new possibilities. We can bring out a lot of their strengths that they know they've relied on before. And this is where we're really going to start to explore that. How can we make change possible? And not necessarily get into why change is needed, but okay, what's the next step? You know, how are we going to get to this goal that they would like to accomplish? So with any vision, we can only achieve what we first imagine, right? Like we need the awareness there to say, yes, I can do this. It's helpful to keep that vision in the present tense because again, the brain doesn't really necessarily know the difference. And when we are talking in present tense, our brain can actually interpret that as it's happening, even when we're visioning it, which is a big part of why you see visioning with athletes. Because again, when our brain visualizes that going on, it's as if it's actually happening.
Yeah, there's a good book that I use sometimes to pull things from to help with session 1. It's called Creative Visualizations. I think it came out in the 70s.
Oh, okay.
But it has different ones that you can use. And it's not written for health and wellness coaching. That didn't really exist in the 70s. But I thought I'd throw that in here because I have pulled some out.
Okay, yeah, that's a good tip. Good tip. Okay, in the visioning, you know, you can inquire who's with you. You know, pull out their because. You know, I want to lose weight because. And again, the because is the important part because a lot of times they're going to come to you and, oh, I have a big wedding or I've got a reunion coming up and I want to lose weight so that I look great at this reunion. Yet when we can dig deeper and really find those intrinsic motivators, that true because that's going to keep them going. That's one of our goals with the visioning is to get to that because. And one of the best ways we can do that is to be curious, ask questions, allow them to dig deeper, get specific with some of those questions. And it can be helpful to focus on what they want versus what they don't want. You know, I don't want to be tired versus if we focus on, I'd like to have more energy.
Kind of focusing on the more positive aspect of that best.
Of what's to come.
Yes.
Absolutely. So that's stage 1. So now we're going to move on to stage 2, assessment, focus, and readiness. Okay, the values are pretty much going to come out as you're doing the visioning. However, if you want to get formal with the values, you can. A lot of times there are people who they like to really dig in and they like to take the assessments and learn more about themselves and all of the things. And those type of people taking a true values assessment can be helpful. A lot of times just in the visioning, you're going to find those values and you're going to be able to really pull those out.
Yeah, people start talking about them without you asking questions about what you value. They'll start talking about the why behind the why. And that's where you're like, oh, they value this. So you gather a lot of that in the visioning, especially if you get really specific with it.
Exactly. Yeah. And you just kind of pull them out, put them in your back pocket, and bring them out when you need them as you're moving on. And so, again, values really drive us. And so the more we tap into their values, again, that intrinsic motivation can really start to develop. I have found that even later on in those sessions, when you have someone who's truly ambivalent, a lot of times bringing their values back into play can be really helpful, because when they can see that some of their actions are not necessarily lining up with their values, that can really help tip the scale sometimes to kind of allow them to shift a little bit out of that ambivalence.
Yeah, good point.
And we always want to remember that we are coaching to the client's values, not necessarily our values. And again, that just takes us monitoring ourselves and having an understanding of, this is the client that I am serving. My values do not really have a place in this coaching session. So here we are again, and we're going to flip over to the assessment. So this is that wellness wheel that we have talked about in some of our other lectures. And this is going to take a holistic look. We're going to be looking at everything, not just where we exercise, what are we eating, but all of those different dimensions of wellness are what we're going to be talking about in this. And this is allowing that client to observe their current state of health. So it's a different assessment than what we're used to. We're not taking someone's blood and telling them what their A1C is, or those are more of those common assessments. So this can be a bit of a change for some people to actually stop and say, hey, what do I know about me, and what are these areas, and how are they impacting my overall well-being? So it's just a nice time to pause and let them take a good look at all of those different areas and where they stand, and visualize where they would like to be.
I think there's a few, you can go ahead with the slides, but I think there's a few areas that are surprising to clients. Like, we don't often sit down and think, what's the current state of affairs concerning my relationships in my life, and where would I really like for those to be, or finances, or spirituality. So sometimes I see clients landing on some that probably are the first time they've ever been asked to really look at those areas of their life, and they're like, wow, I really could make some changes here. And kind of quick, fast, in a hurry. Like, they might be more of the low-hanging fruit than trying to change the way they eat, or the way they move, or how often they move, kind of thing. So more land on those others, surprisingly, to me and to themselves, I think, than you would think.
Yeah. And the beauty of them all being connected is you just start to see the carryover, and they see the carryover. And it's just this fun progression to watch that, who knew when I just started over here, wow, look at where I've landed.
Now I'm sleeping better, wow.
Yes, because it all carries over. And we don't give all of those areas enough credit, because they can be so impactful, and we don't even realize that it is. And so when we can take time to pause and look at all of those areas, it can really, really help create a focus and direction of, okay, I got this. I can do it. So with the self-assessment, it really does bring in self-awareness and allows them to reflect a little bit. We can see discrepancies start to develop. So when we're going through each of those things, when you go through that wellness wheel and you're cueing them, what is your current sleep right now? And then, okay, where would you like that sleep to be? And so when we can start to develop that discrepancy between where they are now and where they want to be, that's when you can really start to feel good about the focus area and where they want to move and which one's going to make the most sense to start with. Writing things down can be really powerful. And again, you'll have those people that love to do this kind of stuff, and it can be pretty powerful. You'll have others that are going to want you to just send it to them electronically and just go through. It depends on who's in front of you as to how this is going to look. And that's the beauty of it, though. Everybody looks different, and you're just going to learn as you go with those personalities of, okay, what's going to be the best way to go through this assessment. The self-assessment is going to start to uncover motivation and confidence. You'll learn a lot about where they stand when you have the conversations around the assessment, and that can start to give you an idea of, okay, what is their readiness? Where do we stand here? And you're going to dig deeper into their readiness, yet it's a nice starting point to get an idea of where they stand in each of those different areas. It's important for us to approach these assessments with curiosity and not necessarily a diagnosis or an evaluation. This is really a time for them to explore. So we're not looking for problems to be solved. We're just looking for opportunities of, oh gosh, this is where I stand right now, and yeah, this is where I would like to be. And as we're going through the self-assessment with them, we always want to hold that client in positive regard. You know, so often our clients are used to coming into the doctor and, oh, well, you're diabetic, you have diabetes, oh, you've got high blood pressure, your cholesterol's too high. And so it can really be refreshing when we kind of, flip the coin on that. And let's talk about some things you feel really good at. And as we're going through them, really bringing out some of that positivity within all of them.
Yeah, and as the coach, you're going to want to, take a lot of good notes after the session about their wellness wheel, because you want to remember those strengths that came up, because you're going to hear a lot about their strengths, and you're going to see patterns across the wheel when they talk about the different ones. And so you notice the patterns of strength and use those when they get down to their action planning. So if you've noticed, wow, they're really good in these areas, and they talked about how well organized they were in those areas, and that's how they were so strong in the area of sleep because they set a hard schedule or whatever, then you're going to want to pull that out and say, hey, you're really good at organization. How might you use that in this area? So take good notes and pull those back out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they don't see that carryover.
Right. They won't see their own patterns.
Yes.
We just don't see our own patterns sometimes.
Right. Yes. And so for someone to say, well, hey, how can we use this in this other area? It's kind of like, oh, well, I never really thought about that before. That does make sense.
Right. Another thing on the wellness wheel, when they're assessing themselves, as a first-time new coach, I was confused that we really needed to try to direct the client in the area of the one that had the largest gap between where they were and where they wanted to be. And that is not true. So go ahead and don't make the mistake that I made and had that in my head. They may choose to focus in on one that's just 2 digits away on their number scale. Yeah. And that's okay. They get to decide.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And most often it's surprising where they land.
Yeah. It is. And it surprised me.
Yeah, it is.
Even
not
after,
necessarily.
No, even after session 1, I have in my head, I think we're headed towards, and then they blow me out of the water in session 2 with going a different direction.
Just a whole different path. Yeah. And sometimes when there's such a huge discrepancy, the confidence isn't there yet.
Right. That's a good point.
To dive into this area that we have this really large discrepancies can almost backfire. And if they're not feeling confident enough to do that, then certainly that's not an area that makes sense to start with. And once they start making changes in other areas, what you see is that confidence builds in those other areas. And so again, they get to be the guide, which is the fun part, because it keeps you on your toes, because you don't necessarily know where they're going to land. And then you just get to see them grow in all the different areas. So it's always exciting. No one ever looks the same. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So this is just the wellness wheel again. You guys have seen this, and this is just all of those different areas. And again, come up with your own wheel, particularly depending on, the type of clientele that you're working with. There may be other components of the wheel that you want to highlight, that you see those common threads of what that looks like. And so there's so many different wheels out there. And just, create one that you feel good with, that you feel like resonates with you and the type of people that you're going to serve. And so there's a lot of wiggle room within this wheel. The bottom line is we want to take a holistic approach. We want to look at all of those different dimensions of wellness. And within that scope, the possibilities are endless of what that can look like. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about what the wellness assessment looks like as you are working through this with your client. And so these are just the instructions on our particular wheel. And what they're going to do is as they're completing the assessment, they're just going to look at each of those different dimensions and say, okay, how do I feel each of these are impacting me right now? Where do I stand in this area? And they're just going to rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 10 of where they feel like they are. And then you're going to do the same thing of where you would like to be. And so again, we're kind of creating a little bit of that discrepancy. And so when I'm going through this with the clients that I work with, I tell them the goal isn't to be a 10 in every single category. The goal is to really just get an understanding of, okay, how much is this impacting my life? And then where would I like it to be? And so I'm trying to think of an example of one of the wheels. Okay, so let's say relationships. Let's say that you have a mother-in-law who was just diagnosed with dementia and she now lives in your house. Okay, well, what does your environment, what do your relationships look like? Okay, well, I'm at like a 3 because our whole world has been rocked. We now have mother-in-law, she has dementia. It is so difficult. It is just really creating completely different dynamics. Yet I know that this is an area that is not going to change for a long time. So where I would like to be in 6 months, a year, is probably still going to be a 3 just because of the circumstances. So again, it's not always going to land on a 10 because of where you are. A new mother is probably not going to come to us and say, hey, I want to fix my sleep right now. It's not ideal, yet it's not going to be one that can actually change right now. It doesn't mean that we can't have this vision of where we want it to be ultimately, yet you're not always going to see all of these 10s. And everyone interprets it different. So what we think is a 5 in our brain can be very different of what they're interpreting as a 5. And so it's always important to ask as you're going through that wellness assessment, well, what does a 5 mean to you? Whatever that number is that they chose. So that way we can begin to have an understanding of their perception of what these numbers are.
Yeah, because I'm an 8, let's go to a 10 kind of person. But you'll have clients who will say, well, I'm a 2, I want to go to a 4. And when you get to talking about it, it's the same as my 8 to 10.
Yes. So exactly. So you just never know. Right. So it's always important to dig in, just so we have clarity around, okay, what are we talking about here? So this is just an example from our assessment of what one area would look like. So each area has its own little section with a little description of what it is, and then they're going to give themselves a current rating of where we are now. And then, and I encourage them, that vision that we talked about in our first session, when you think of that vision, where would you like to be? What does that look like in that vision of best health? To kind of help guide them in what that looks like as far as where they're headed. And then there's an area where they can elaborate, comment, and put some things down as they're going through.
Yeah. I like to hit my clients up for a lot of comments. I really want them to, and I'm working with just private practice clients. I'm not in a corporate world. So I want them to give me a lot of feedback on their thoughts in this so we can talk about it. And I asked them to do it ahead of time and send it to me so I can read those ahead of time. They don't always do that, or they don't always have time for that, and that's okay. We can talk about it there and we can go through it there. I just feel like we get more, a deeper conversation going around it if they have had time to give it some considerable thought and write their thoughts down a little bit. But again, each client's different, and
you'll get those that are like, oh, it never came out of my car. At least in my corporate world.
No, it happens in mine too. They're like, oh, I hate writing things down.
Yeah. Oh.
I did the number part, but that's it. And so it's fine either way. Yeah. But I do try to encourage that. You made a point the other day that I thought was a really good point, Beth, that sometimes it's easier to come to it with a beginner's mind if you haven't read their comments first. And I've been toying with that idea, and I might switch to that some and just see how that goes for me, because I've always encouraged them to give a lot of thought and let me read it first.
Yeah.
And then formulate my questions around some of what they've written. But anyway, I'm thinking about
and there's positive to both ways to do it, which is what gets you through the ones that don't send it to you. Okay, we're going in with a beginner's mind
because that's all we got.
That's what we gonna do.
Right.
So again, there's no right or wrong. Right. There's no right or wrong way to do it, and you'll find your groove.
Yeah,
you will. You'll find what you prefer. You'll find what brings out the questions that you are going to feel comfortable with, and you're going to roll with it, and you will learn that everybody's different who's in front of you. Yes. And it'll, it will be fine no matter which way, however you do it. And ultimately it comes down to our questions and kind of allowing them to discover in the long run anyway. So. Yeah,
and I think that is partly just my personality. I'm kind of a planner, and I want to know what's going to happen ahead of time and be ready for it and all that, where you're really good at like, oh, you want me to? Yes, I'll do that right now. Okay, yeah, let's go. And I'm like, oh, I need a day of planning first. So part of it, I think, is just, you'll put your own personality into this as well.
You will. And you learn a lot about yourself in health coaching.
Yeah, you do.
You really do. Because it is true. Because I've never even really thought about myself as that way. Yet that does not rock my world at all. To have anything just land on my plate.
No, you can just
we'll make it work.
it.
Whatever's going to happen is going to happen.
And it turns out beautiful. Better than my having a whole day of planning.
I doubt that. It's all in how we shape our mindset, right? we go make it work because we have to. It's all good. Okay, so this is just a little snippet of the wellness assessment. So here's our structure again. And as we've gone through the wellness assessment, this is going to start guiding us to the focus. And the focus is that dimension, that area, where they want to land, what they feel like is going to be the best place to start. And again, it's going to come from what they've learned in that wellness assessment. And it's not always the one with the biggest gap. Sometimes it's the easiest that they feel like, yes, you know what, if I tackle this, this is doable. Sometimes you have those that are like, oh my gosh, this string is getting pulled so hard. I absolutely have to start with this right now. So again, it'll look different on everybody. The biggest thing that we have to remember is that we don't decide for them. They get to pick. Because again, you'll be so surprised at how often they land on something that you wouldn't think, particularly from that first session and what you see in their visioning, and then they land on something just totally different. And so it just reiterates the importance of, we don't know our client. They know themselves best, and we need to honor that and respect that and let them do what they know is going to make the most sense.
Let them make a 180-degree turn if they need to from session one. And even what drove, like my clients are all coming to me voluntarily. So they're coming with something in their mind already that they want to work on. And so in this type of setting, if you're coaching in this type of setting, you need to be really open to just really letting them make a full-on shift. Even if they call you on the phone and say, hey, I want to lose some weight, I need some help, whatever, and then they end up working on relationships. That's okay. I caution you, particularly as a new young coach, don't get in deep with whatever they called you about. Just hear them out and let them decide once they go through the whole wheel what their focus is. And you made a good point. The focus is where they're going to start. Keyword. That's where they decide to start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you will find you'll even switch, you'll be a couple weeks in and they discover, wow, okay, sleep is actually getting a little more in the way than relationships. I think I need to switch gears. So you'll even see switching gears once you've really kind of come up with that focus sometimes as well, which is great because the more they're moving forward, the more they're discovering about themselves.
Right.
And the more comfortable they are at, okay, actually, this is what I need to do.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I feel like I had another thing I wanted to add into that. I'll think of it in a minute.
It'll come back to
around the focus. It'll come back to me. Yes, it will.
You will focus in later.
Yes. Sorry. So as we're helping go through each of those areas and, kind of settling on a focus, this is where we really want to start digging into, okay, does this focus make the most sense? And that's when we start to look at, okay, what are some of those values that we learned about? How can we bring those into play? And then how important is it for them to make a change in this area? And along with that, what are the benefits that come with that change? And again, is it something that we may see immediate benefits? And if so, that might make sense to move forward with that one. And again, it might not be the flashing, glaring one, yet if we know we can start to see some change, they may feel like that's the better way to go. And, how confident are they? These are two big pieces of knowing, okay, this is going to be a really good place for us to start.
One of the things I want to say about that, Beth, before we move totally on away from focus is sometimes if a client comes in and it's something they've tried lots of times and haven't felt very successful at it and they're reaching out to you for help, I think sometimes that's when it might be best for them to focus on something that there are some short-term benefits to build momentum and build confidence in themselves overall, and then move towards that. And I'm not saying direct them in that way. I'm saying if they decide, I'm going to work on this other thing first, this seems like it would be easier, then I see that as a success, that the client is sort of naturally building some success and confidence and self-efficacy in themselves before they move on to that thing that has been so hard for them in their mind.
Such a great point. Such a great point. Because a lot of times they do come to us very defeated. Yeah. And all they know is defeat. Yeah. And so, yes, when they can start to feel a little momentum from, okay, look at me, I did this, it can make all the difference in the world in that area that they have just had such a difficult time making change. Yeah. Okay, so once we've determined the focus that they're comfortable starting with, there's two components that come into play here. And that is determining their readiness to change. Are they actually ready to take some steps within this focus area? And so within readiness to change, the components are how important is it and how confident are they that they can actually make a change? And so again, just because they have said, I want to work on sleep, this is it, this is the one that makes sense, and we've gone through all of the things. Sometimes when we start to dig into the importance and confidence, this can shift, and we find that maybe we're not quite ready to take some steps in this area. And so that's a big part of what we're going to do once we determine that focus. So let's start with the importance. And you really always want to dig into importance first.
Yes.
Over confidence, because if it's not important enough, then it doesn't matter. It's a moot point. So there's no point in talking about the confidence, because we really do want to make sure that it is important enough, because if it's not important, we're not going to be motivated to do it. Right. So importance is huge. And so this is going to be the first area that we really start to explore. And when you do this, you can kind of take it back to that on a scale of 1 to 10. How important is it? And I have found with mine, sometimes you have to reiterate that 1 to 10 scale. I don't know if you see that, but sometimes they get confused because they've just done it on the assessment of a 1 to 10 of where I am and where I want to be.
Yeah, but that's a where I am and where I want to be. This is how important
is it right now?
Yes.
And so I have found, just from experience, it helps to really differentiate what we're looking at now, because sometimes they can let that assessment kind of creep back into some of their thoughts. And so I'm really intentional about kind of explaining, okay, when we're talking about importance, and you're thinking about sleep, how important is making changes to your sleep habits right now in this moment? And if you could give that a number, what would that number be? And so then you'll find that they give it a number. And so again, it can just help bring a little more awareness to where they stand. And numbers are going to look different. So again, a 3 to somebody may look like an 8 to us, or vice versa. And so it's always important to inquire about that number. So we never want to assume that we understand what their number means. We're always going to want to dig into, okay, what does a 7 look like to you, so that they can really start to elaborate. And there's all sorts of questions that you can ask around this. And we'll talk about this when we get deeper into session 2 of like how to ask those questions. But if you've got someone who has said, well, my sleep is a 3. I'm getting a little bit of sleep, but it's not exactly where we are. And so, okay, we can ask them, what does a 3 mean to you? And then, okay, well, what makes it a 3 and not necessarily a 1? And when you start to ask the questions in that manner, what happens is you're beginning to create some change talk. So you always want to begin with the higher number and ask, well, why is it this versus a lower number? Because then they start to talk about the good things that are happening when they're tapping into that higher number. So there's a method to the madness in how we explore this importance and confidence, and we will go through all of that as well. So main goal is we want to figure out where they are with importance. And once we feel good about where the importance lies, and generally, if they choose a 7 or higher, they're confident it's important enough, and they're confident enough to move on. And that is a test question. So write that one down.
Needs to be a 7 or higher on the national board exam.
It needs to be a 7 or higher for you to want to move on.
Yeah.
Now, I will say that I have found in my experience in coaching, we have not always necessarily been a 7 or higher, and they have been very, very comfortable with moving forward and just, this is what I want to do. Yeah. Even after we've kind of gone through the how to increase confidence, how to increase importance, and that's okay. And I've seen them be successful. So again, the numbers look different on everyone. And so, kind of 2 sides of the coin here. I can say, anecdotally, I have seen that the numbers aren't hard and firm yet as far as that test. And they need a break-off point to ask. Sure. Just know 7 or above is kind of where they feel like those clients are landing to be successful in moving forward. So that brings us to confidence, the second big component. And when I'm talking to my people, I'm like, hey, there's 2 big pieces that come into play here, importance and confidence. So they know kind of where we stand in the method behind the questions that we're asking them. And again, if the client does not have a high enough level of confidence, then it's going to be really hard. It is. And so we really want to dig into, where do you stand confidence-wise? And again, if their confidence is low, there are ways that we can step in and build that confidence. And we will talk about that when we go through session 2 of like what some of those questions look like. And so our role here is to really support and build that confidence, particularly if this is a focus area that you can tell they're really passionate about, yet they're just really leery of moving forward. And a lot of times it's because it's all they know. They've tried and they've tried and they've tried. And so now knowing that they've got the support of this coach and then some of the things that we can talk about to build that confidence can really help move them in a positive direction. So this is an area we always want to tap into. Okay, so now we've talked about importance. It's good, it's high, confidence, they're ready to move forward. So now we get to talk about, okay, let's set some goals here.
I think this surprises clients that you're not setting goals out of the gate.
Yeah.
Some of them come in with goals already prepared. They're like session one, wanting to tell you what their goal is. I'm like, we're going to get there.
Yep.
It's going to be 3 sessions from now, but we're going to get there.
We will get there.
We
Yes.
got to lay the groundwork first, and that's very important and key in my mind.
It is. It is. And it does. It makes a difference. Again, there's a method to the madness.
Yes.
There is. So when we do finally get to the goals, that's when that's when the fun starts. When pedal to the metal, we start moving some things. There are 2 types of goals, and we wanted to put this in because this is also a test question. So understand the differences between outcome goals and behavior goals. So your outcome goals are kind of those result-oriented, kind of end result things of, I want to lose weight. I want to sleep better. I want to become the CEO of my company.
Yeah, I think of it like in the end, outcome, I want to,
Yes, that's a good way to think of it. Yeah. So it's kind of that broader thing. If you're working with young women, I want to be pregnant. If that's their end goal, that's that outcome goal. Behavior goals are the goals that actually contain the action of what we're going to be doing. And sometimes you'll see in the literature, these are called process goals and learning goals, but generally you're going to see behavior goals.
Yeah, I think on the national exam, it calls them behavior goals every time.
I think so too.
But in your reading of your text, you'll see
You
process,
may see,
learning goals.
process or learning goals. So again, this is I am going to run. I am going to turn my phone off at 10 p.m. every night. So this is the actual action, the behavior that we're doing to get us to that long-term outcome goal. And so we as health coaches work with behavior goals.
Yeah.
That's what we're all about.
Yes.
Okay, so when we get into goal setting, essentially what you're going to do is we've found the focus and we're now, okay, where do you want to be? And most of the time I frame this in at the end of our time together, where would you like to see yourself? What is that goal that you would like to accomplish while we are working together? Most of the questions on the exam are centered around 3 to 6 months, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
But this is, again,
I feel like 6 months, even more than 3, actually.
yes, realistically for what I see, 100% 6 months, depending on, again, the actual long-term goal. And so a lot of times when I'm working with my clients, I'll just say, okay, so when you think about, we kind of stretch out the future. And again, where you would like to be after our time together, and you reflect back and say, yes, that was a successful coaching experience for me. What do you see? What would you like to have accomplished by that time? And then that allows us to kind of set this end goal of where they want to be. And when you're creating a goal, you want to make sure that, again, this is where that confidence comes into play. You want to make sure that you've got an appropriate amount of stretch in there, that it's not so easy that they're like, we're not motivated to do it because it's too easy. Yet we don't want it to be so difficult that we just throw the towel in. So, and this is where a lot of learning comes in, because a lot of times we don't know our stretch, and it takes setting a certain action step to figure out, okay, wait a minute, that was too big of a step. Way too big. And I like to use the marathon as my analogy. And so I tell them, okay, we've got this marathon, and the end of the marathon is essentially that 6-month goal that we're talking about. And sometimes we're going to be running a little bit faster than other times. And there may be a step that's not near as big as another. And that's what we're going to learn along the way. And each week, the size of our step may look a little different, yet we're always going to keep in mind what size step makes sense for me right now. And knowing I've got this goal that's out here is kind of the way that we look at it. And again, these are all going to be those behavior goals that we are setting. So when we set the goal, we're always going to want to make it SMART. And we'll dig into that acronym. And most of you are probably familiar with the SMART acronym. So we always want it to be specific, measurable. We want it to be action-oriented, realistic, and always tied to a time. Okay, and again, we'll go through what all of that is. And as we're setting the goals, we always want to keep that vision and values kind of right there close to us, because that intrinsic motivation is what's going to keep them going. Because there's going to be some days that are easier than others. And when we are, when we have that mother that comes in, it's like, no, I'm doing this because this is for my kid. I want to be the mom that can X, Y, Z. That's going to go a lot further than, some of those more extrinsically motivated themes that come up.
Getting in the wedding dress.
Yes, exactly. Because the wedding will be over. Right. It's going to be real easy to just go back to what we were doing. Right. We always going to be a mama. Those kids aren't going anywhere. So we always want to kind of tie those intrinsic motivations back. And so as we're doing that, I thought this was just a nice little saying. When we're using that coach approach lens, a goal is not a goal until it's shared.
I haven't seen that. This is new to me. I like that. I just looked at that. I'm like, oh, I love it. Nice addition.
And so, right, like when we share it and talk about it, then it does become a goal.
It becomes a goal. Yeah.
Right. It's real. It's there. So that's the fun part, is they get to share that with us. So then we can really, help them move in the direction they want to go. So we talked a little bit about stretch on the other slide. We want to go just beyond the comfort zone. We do want to push ourselves, because when we accomplish hard things, our confidence grows. We feel good about ourselves. And so there's always that sweet spot, the Goldilocks area of, okay, we want it to be just right so that we don't feel completely defeated because we couldn't do it, yet we feel good enough that, man, I did something that was a little uncomfortable for me, and I did it.
But I did it.
I did it. Yeah. Exactly. And you're going to find that barriers come up. And, again, we've talked about this all the time. There's no misstep. There's no wrong step. It's just, okay, well, look what we've learned. Now we know this. And so the barriers really, and I tell my clients this all the time, the barriers are great. If we didn't see the barriers and find them, we would never know how to get around them. So the more barriers we come across, it's just more information. It's just giving us more meat to work with when we come across those barriers.
Right.
But sometimes we may need to even brainstorm some new ideas. If we find, okay, this seemed like such a great idea. This was an awesome action step, yet we keep coming across those barriers. Sometimes it makes sense. Okay, why don't we maybe just take a different route? What would that look like if we just looked at this in a different way? And sometimes that might take brainstorming to do that. Okay, so we're back to our structure here. Okay, so again, we're into preparation. And now, this was a cute little quote. A goal without a plan is just a wish, right?
Yep.
And it is. We can
we're not into wishes.
Have all these wishes. Exactly. Yet, if there's something we really want to accomplish, if we put a plan behind it, it's going to happen. It's going to absolutely happen. And that is what leads us into preparation. So as we're preparing for the action step, whatever that looks like, there's really a sequence that we're going to go through. And this almost becomes the session over and over again.
Repetitive, ongoing sessions.
So each time you meet, we're just going to go through all of this. So initially, before we've learned anything about how this is going to play out, we're going to begin with, okay, let's explore a typical day. So, okay, I'm going to turn my phone off every night at 10 o'clock. So, okay, well, let's play that out. Okay, we've done the things and, we've got the phone out, we're scrolling through whatever, and it's 10 o'clock. What happens next?
How do you know it's 10 o'clock?
Exactly. Okay, and then it's like, okay, well, how will you remember?
Right, exactly.
And so you just get really specific with, what it helps to start with what does the day look like now before you even integrate that action step. Okay, what does it look like now? What is your typical day? I do this and this, and then I get my phone out, and then before I know it, it's midnight. I turn it off. I try to go to sleep, and it's really hard for me to fall asleep. Okay, so we talked about wanting to turn that phone off at 10 p.m. every night. So now when you think about adding that action step into your day, what does your day look like? And then once you kind of go through that, then you start to almost even work backwards of,
yes, you've got to do. That's right.
Phone is off. How are you going to know to turn your phone off? Well, I'm a reminders person. How am I going to, let me set a reminder. Okay, what does it look like leading up to? And then I even get in, when are you setting the reminder?
And sometimes they'll say right now. A
lot of times they'll do it right
Let
then.
me get my phone.
Yes.
I'm going to do it right now.
Exactly. So you just kind of talk through, okay, here's what we want to do. How can we actually make that happen in a way that makes sense to you? And then we're going to think about, okay, well then what are some barriers? What happens at 10 o'clock that might get in the way of you actually turning your phone? Well, it might be a really good movie. Okay, what would be some steps to take knowing it's going off at 10 that would have you in a mental space that it's going to be okay to shut it down? And again, this looks a million different ways. Right. I mean, this is just a random scenario I've pulled out of my head, but so you want to kind of have them think through their barriers. A big one, I have a lot of people that like to walk on their breaks at work. So they walk 20 minutes a day in their 10-minute break. Okay, what does it look like on the days that it rains? So there's always a potential barrier that might creep in, and the more you can kind of get ahead of it, the more they can have a plan in place, which is going to lead to success. And this, again, is where you can just get super, super specific depending on what it is.
Right.
And then when you find the barrier, you're going to create the backup plan.
Yes.
Okay, when it's raining, I'm actually just going to sit up and down in my chair 15 times. Awesome, or whatever that looks like. We have a conference room that we go and walk around.
Oh, nice.
Whatever it is. And everybody's backup plan is going to look different to that. And then once you have all of that in place, then you're going to discuss accountability. So not only, okay, how are you going to hold yourself accountable? Are there any accountability partners that you would like to integrate into this? And this can be where setting some of the reminders, setting the alarms, those types of things, putting a sticky note here to remind me, whatever that looks like. And then following up with, okay, how can I help you be accountable? And sometimes that looks like nothing. And sometimes that looks like, hey, how about just a quick text on Wednesday to say, how did the gym go yesterday? Ray has some great stories on accountability.
Crazy accountability stories
that have come up.
So I've noticed that a lot of times clients do start out using you as the coach. I have a lot who want to send me a picture of something once they've done it, or once they've laid their shoes out to do it, or whatever. Even the teeny baby steps. And so I get random pictures of tennis shoes sitting on the floor beside a bed, or clothes laid out, or whatever it is. And then I had the one client who made a accountability partner of a friend to call that friend on the way home from work so she wouldn't turn into Trader Joe's and purchase the things she did not want to consume. And so she used that friend for the first several weeks before she created a new habit of just driving by that and not even noticing Trader Joe's anymore. So people start out with an accountability plan and partners who are really kind of holding their hands at first. And then they slowly let go of that and learn it just becomes a new habit, and they're accountable to themselves. And that's really what we want.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because they figure out how to become accountable to themselves.
Yes.
And then they can apply that to anything moving forward.
Right.
And this, when we talk about how the coach sets up, more of the structure and the logistics, this is where you as the coach can find your comfort zone too. I share my cell phone with every one of my clients.
Yeah.
So same thing.
I do too.
It's so fun. And again, this is where we're all different. If you're not comfortable with that, that is perfectly fine. But there is nothing more rewarding than getting a text from, I've had pictures from the track, pictures of all sorts of random stuff. I mean, I'll have had the back of yogurts sent to me of, look which yogurt I chose.
Nutrition facts panels.
Exactly. So it's, again, however comfortable you are with, whether that's a text, an email, it can be really helpful in the beginning though. And, again, the goal is to kind of become less involved as it goes. And you'll find it just naturally happens, honestly. Yeah. It's not that we have to step in and say, I'm not texting you this week.
Right. No.
You'll find that it just naturally takes off from there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, back to our structure. So now we're doing it. We're doing the things. We're putting the plan to the test, so it's no longer a wish. It's actually happening.
That's right.
And this is where the learning occurs. So this is where they come back and say, okay, 10 o'clock shut-off time is not realistic. I didn't even have a chance to sit down in my chair until 9:58, or whatever it looks like. And so again, those are the things where it's like, okay, awesome. This is, we're learning. This
now
is
right?
Yeah, exactly. And we really do want to keep those steps small because we want them to be realistic. And we always want them to be determined by the client.
That's one of the things, if you're doing private practice, you'll have to kind of keep an eye on and help your clients to keep it small.
Yeah.
And you don't have to say, let's keep this. You don't have to do that. You can do it in the form of, okay, so prior to that, what's the step before that? And ask them questions that back them into a small step approach. It's that thing you said with kind of going backwards. And so they'll kind of get to it themselves, like, oh yeah, I probably don't want to start running 8 miles tomorrow, because you know what? My running shoes are about 3 years old, so maybe this week I need to start by ordering me some running shoes, and if they get here in a couple of days, then maybe I'm just out there for 1 or 2 days.
Right.
So you just, by way of questioning, can help them pare down. And I think with private practice clients who voluntarily reaced out for a coach, they tend to come in with already a larger goal in mind. So
true.
It's important to
back it. And even when you get to the shoes, well, I don't even know what kind of shoes I need anymore.
Right.
Am I a pronator? Am I not a pronator? So it gets,
maybe I need to go to the
let me just even figure out what shoes
Fleet.
to order. Exactly.
Wait, that wasn't a commercial for feet. That's where I can fit my shoes.
I do too. They're awesome, actually.
Let me get the 3D machine going and let them watch me run.
Yes. And then you can feel good about your new shoes.
Yes.
Okay, so
Squirrel.
Back to action. Exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
When I'm talking sometimes to my clients about the small step approach, I like to remind them, okay, if we do things in a way that makes sense, when you look at some of what they've tried before of, okay, I just heard a commercial today with my son in the car. We were driving to school this morning. It's like, lose a pound of fat in a day. And it's like, I looked at my son and was like, well, that sounds realistic, doesn't it? And Charlie was like, yeah. He's like, wow, 50 pounds in 50 days. And again, a lot of times that's just what we know, right? Is like this, I've got to go big. I got to go big quick. And what happens is when you get to day 50, well, then it's like, oh, it's over. Okay, great. I'm just going to go back to what I was doing before because it's this gigantic change that is miserable. No one can do this.
Everybody's looking for the end date.
Yes,
so
it's like, oh, I'm just marking it off. Okay, I did my, 10-day detox, or I did my whatever. And so when I'm working with my clients, I like to, okay, if we do things in a small step approach, and okay, today I'm just going to put something green on my plate. I'm not going to change anything. I'm just going to add something green. Okay. Well, by the end of a month, there's always something green on the plate, and we're not even thinking about it. Okay, well then they've integrated this other really small step. And when we do it in a way that we almost don't even know that we're doing it, what happens is when we get to day 50 or day whatever, we're just living life.
Yeah.
There is no reverting back to, oh God, well, I did all this thing to lose this 30 pounds in 30 days. We're just living life.
I'm just a person who always puts a green thing on the plate.
Put something green on my plate. Right.
That's just who I am now.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And so when we do, it's like our children growing in front of our eyes. We never really see them grow. When we can take a small enough step approach that we feel good about, and again, that there's enough stretch that we do it, because if it's too easy, we're just going to stop doing it too because we're not motivated, then it's like growing. We're just, before we know it, we're a runner. But we really haven't even, there's nothing to flip back to because we did it in a way that makes sense. We did it in a way that sticks.
Right. You can't even say, here's the day I became a runner.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
I just became a runner.
I just run.
I now
Yeah.
run. Wow.
I just run. So anyway, there's that on the small step approach. Okay. There are tracking apps, things, methods out there that you may find helpful. Again, it'll be client driven because, you could tell somebody, hey, start tracking your food in MyFitnessPal. And they're like, that's a terrible idea. I don't even ever have my cell phone on me. Like, I'm never going to learn this. So again, it needs to always be client driven. And you do have some of those people that are really motivated by tracking. Like how many people a friend of mine, I saw her at the track one day, literally as we were talking, she was still running because she had to get to a certain number of steps on this watch. And I was like, okay, so she's clearly motivated by tracking what this watch is telling her. So it can be helpful, particularly when we're starting out, to have that little extra motivation. So this is just something that is now available, out there in what might work. And again, a discussion with the client will kind of bring out what the best thing. But I think they start to talk a little bit about this on the exam, don't they? Just to know that there are apps out there and just be familiar with the more common methods that are out there, the more common, your...
His clients will ask you too.
Right, yeah. Kind of like your Fitbits, your Apples, just that they exist. And also there's a little blurb about knowing that Apple's going to make you think that theirs is end all be all. Whoop is going to tell you their heart rate variability is the best thing out there. And so for us to know that these numbers can be helpful, however, it's not necessarily set in stone.
Right.
What these are, to understand that there are actually limits within these things. So.
I still track my lifting, strength training. And I just take a piece of paper and a pen.
Oh, me too.
Right up in the gym
every day,
like an old person, and I'm writing, just marking them off.
Yeah. My dad gets so frustrated at the WAG. He's like, everybody has their phone. And I'm like, get off this machine. Put your phone down. And I'm like, yeah, but Dad, they're tracking what they're doing. Like, it looks like they're on their phone, but that's just because that's how people do it nowadays.
Right.
No, I have my old school notebook. Yes.
Yeah, me
that
too.
I constantly, that I'm writing in. But yes.
I'm a person who loves to look back and see. I mean, I don't do it often, but once in a while I like to look back and see a year ago.
Yes.
What was I lifting and,
versus now.
Yeah.
Well, I can't remember what I lifted the week before.
Well,
I like to write it down to be like, oh, okay, that's what I did last week. So I know I could do a little more this week.
With that too. Like, wait, what am I doing?
And you think there's no way I'll forget this, and then I'll be like, now what weight did I do?
Yes.
Yeah. So it can be beneficial in all areas.
Lots of reasons for tracking. Can just help your memory.
Exactly. Okay, so when they come back, we're going to assess the action. We're going to acknowledge the successes that they had. And again, we want to start with that because they're going to come in and be like, oh my gosh, I failed miserably.
I didn't do what I said I was going to do.
Yes, yes. And so again, we want to pull out the successes because most of the time there's a lot of success in there they are just only seeing that one little thing that they feel like they didn't do exactly how they wanted to do it. And then we're going to discover what was learned. And then through all of that, we'll help you determine, okay, what's the next action step based on the barriers we came across and all of those things.
Yep. That's right. What you now know about yourself.
Yes. Yes. And then once we're kind of, at the end of coaching, and sometimes not, sometimes they get something and pick it right up and they're just rolling with it. And then we pivot to the next thing or take that a step further, whatever that might be. But maintenance is when, again, we are regularly, there's always something green on the plate. We're not even thinking about it. It's there. We're doing it. There's very few lapses. And then this is where, it's considered a consistent behavior. We are now the runner.
Yep.
We now like to eat green things.
Right.
Whatever that is.
We now go out to a restaurant that doesn't offer something green and we're like,
oh,
what?
Yeah.
There's nothing green here?
Right.
Yes. Where's my green thing?
Where's my green thing? And why did you have to put so much oil on my green thing?
Right. Why did you fry my green thing?
I know, right?
Right. Yes.
Yes. Eventually we get there. And then again, maintenance is generally considered after about 6 months of regular doing the thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this was a question on my exam.
Yes. Yes. So when it's talking about those stages of change, when we were talking about those theories, just know 6 months is kind of that magic number.
Yeah.
When we're talking about maintenance. Yeah. And then really our role is to just support next steps and okay, now what? And in that last session, again, we'll dig into it when we talk about the final session. But the last session is kind of, okay, what's next? What does this look like for you? What are your accountability plans as you take on your new step?
And by then you'll find that they're thinking about it. Because every time I'm at the end and I say, what's next for you? They're like, well, and just roll right into, like, that's the beauty of this process. At the end, people it's not like, well, the wedding's over. Well, I ran the marathon. No, it's like, I've been thinking about that. And I'm thinking I'm going to move on to this, or I'm going to take this to the next level.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now they've been through the process of foreseeing barriers, learning what a realistic step is.
Yes.
And when a realistic step wasn't necessarily the step that was taken, working your way around that. And so it does become this process that they can take for the rest of their lives, no matter what it is.
Yes.
And just keep applying it.
They're self-determined.
Yes. Bingo. Bingo. Okay. And again, this slide is in some of your other slides, as all of these slides are. However, I just wanted to end the session with this because, again, this is, you may see this on the exam too, of just a layout of what a typical coaching session is going to look like. And so when the opening is going to be just that first few minutes of just kind of rapport, touching base, and then you're going to review the goal. What is it that we're actually working toward? And then, what is our longer term goal? That all kind of falls in that earlier part. And then once we get into what is referred to as the generative moment, that's really the bulk of what we're doing. And this is really the peak of the coaching session. This is where we're going to really see some of the client energy, and sometimes even the client defeat. And that's our job to flip that around and say, okay, what went well? And this is really going through all of the things that were discovered, and we're bringing the values in. All of the meat kind of falls in this main part of the coaching session. And then as we gear towards closing, we're going to reset the goal, talk about what's that next action step that we're going to take, and then just any closing comments of the session. So that's just kind of a typical layout of how time-wise that's going to look each session as you're moving on. And we'll just end with skilled coaches realize the coaching process is your guide, not your absolute. So again, we have all of these things and all our check boxes and all our processes and procedures, yet The bottom line is to just connect with your client, provide what they need, be there for them. And yes, there's this pretty little textbook version of what all of these sessions look like, yet it's not your absolute. Just go with the dance. You're going to have, and the dance is different with every client. Sometimes it's the tango, sometimes it's the waltz. You never know.
That's right.
And it's just our job to just go with that dance. And again, the structure behind what we're doing is there. There's a method to the madness, yet that doesn't mean it has to look like that every single time. And when we listen and follow all of those coaching skills, the end goal will be, we will get there. We will.
Yep.
So, and that is the entire coaching structure, all nice and pushed into one slide.
Yeah.
Yes. And again, as with all the slides, if you have any questions or you want us to elaborate any further on any of the things that we're talking about asynchronously, please reach out and let us know. And we are happy to provide clarity, further discussion, anything that might be helpful.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed.